with it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. It was more performative.
Yeah, you're performing the synths into the inside the program. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of like going back, I guess back into the studio with the bands,
Uh-huh.
like how analog do you tend to be with these kinds of sessions? Is this like, you're working on a board, or you're trying to, or are you hybrid? Are you trying to like get it on your Ableton, or is it more of like a Pro Tools thing? Like, what does that look like for you?
It really depends on the band and where they are when they come to me. So, for example, Rainmakers, they came to me, they had already recorded everything. And the guitarist Martin, he like produced really well in Ableton by himself, but they were kind of stuck. They felt like they'd been mixing and mixing and mixing and mixing and weren't getting where they wanted to be. And they came to me with like, I don't know, like maybe 15 like amazing songs. And they were like, but we can afford to have 4 or 5 mixed and mastered. And they were like, can you just help us get this record done? And so at that point, I helped them choose the songs. So I was more like a executive producer on that. And I took them to an analog mixer named Roy Hendrickson, and that EP was mixed analog.
I think Fernando Ladero mentioned him on the podcast. Did he used to work at Avatar?
Yes.
Am I getting this right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So he mixed that project analog, and I thought that would be a solution for the sort of circle that they had been running in, because they were already in Ableton. But other bands, like it depends on where they are in their process. Makes My Blood Dance, which is the same singer, Evan Russell Saffer. When I first joined up with him and John, it was just the two of them, and they only had demos that were in MIDI. Like John had written all the guitar parts, like he's a complete genius, in MIDI. He didn't even know how to play his guitar parts yet because he'd written them all out in MIDI. So they had this very almost like video game sounding demo of the songs with Evan singing over top of them. And I was like, okay, wow. So we really had to build the band right from the beginning. It was just the two of them to start. And I remember going away to NAMM right when I was first starting to work with them. And I said, while I'm gone, your homework is that you're going to learn all these songs on an acoustic guitar. And when I come back, you're going to play them for me on acoustic guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And like, they kind of looked at me like, what the hell? Why would you do that? And I wanted them to do that because learning something on an acoustic guitar is a little bit harder than on an electric. So you have that, but also you're not going to be focused on like your tone, your pedals, blah, 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 blah. You're going to be focused on the song and at the base of its core, like being a strong song. And I knew that they would work that out on their own. So once we had that going, then some of the stuff that was digital is that John brought me the MIDI of the parts that he had imagined for strings and pianos and things like that. And we would have these sort of like, not really writing sessions, but like sound design sessions. So he would give me the MIDI and I would create the string sound or the piano sound to John's specification. And obviously him and Evan would, figure that out. So we went through that process, and then we took all of those, prepped MIDI sort of, synths and strings, anything that wasn't the guitars and bass and drums that were recorded live, and took that into the studio. It was New Future Studio in Belmar. So that was a blend of digital and analog there. There's a lot of analog outboard gear that we were able to track through for, the guitars and the vocals and the bass and drums. And so, but it was a long process. It took us about a year to do those, I think 6 songs. So yeah, wow. I was with them very early on, and they had, different lineup changes too. So, and they were just, they hadn't even done their first gig yet when I started working with them. So, and that's maybe not the normal order that all producers end up working with a band, but it can happen if the band is new. And so, they're all seasoned musicians. It was just that the project was new. So in that case, we had digital first, then analog, but I kind of made them go analog really first by doing just the acoustic guitar. So there's a lot of, like that, again, pre-production was like a long run up before actually being in the studio. And I think sometimes people are like, get a producer, I go to the studio next week. I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, the nurturing that you're talking about, right? Like really nurturing them from the ground up.
Yeah.
And making them really find themselves in their own music, It's one thing to program MIDI, but it's another thing to play it.
Right. And I didn't program their MIDI. John definitely, he's like brilliant, I think, in his own right in terms of how he envisions the orchestration and stuff. But, they were chasing sounds and I was like, oh, I got this. And strangely, that's something else that people kind of know me for is my sound design for MIDI abilities. So it's not like sound design for like film so much as it's sound design for music. So people will bring me their MIDI and just be like, make the MIDI cooler. And that's how I ended up doing a little bit of work with January Jane very, very briefly as well. So that I never had been in the studio with them, but I was always in rehearsals with them and helping them with, the songs and the sounds of their keyboard parts, their synth parts. So, it's something that I guess also people are like interested in having me do on the record is like, oh, if you could just do cool things with our MIDI. I was like, okay, I mean, that's fine too. I really enjoy that.
Elevate the parts.
Yeah. I guess it's not really arranging. It's literally like sound design for music, which is hard to articulate.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about your love affair with synthesizers and synthesis, and maybe some tips for like how to do great work inside the computer.
My love affair with synthesizers. Oh, so like I said earlier, I was a guitarist first, and I was like a very 90s kid. I was really into like all the grunge rock stuff, and I was very like, music from computers isn't real. And then
stuck up like we used to be 20 years ago.
Right. So my friend took me camping, and on the long drive, it was with her parents. We were like 16. She was like, I'm going to make you listen to this record from start to finish. And I was like, okay, what? Same friend that actually convinced me to be a recording engineer. So she's like been very instrumental. She made me listen to 9 Inch Nails, and I was like, oh, now I get it. And it just blew my mind, because I was like, there was so much texture and so many different sounds, and that it was just a bigger palette. So I think that's what spiked my love of synthesis and sound design in that way, and really like almost like music concrete, like found sounds, because anything can be musical. And so I'm very often like really distracted by random noises, not the construction work, but random interesting noises.
Sure.
Where I like find myself about how the noise is happening. Like, is it a plucked sound? Is it a crash? Is it a crunch? So I really think of it almost like the Futurist Manifesto as well. The Italians that had the orchestra that was clonks, clanks, crunches. So that is what started the love affair. But when I am working in the box, because I don't have any modular synths or any hard synths or anything like that, I don't have space for that. But maybe someday.
Yeah, it's a New York City problem.
Yeah.
I get it.
I have to like, between all the guitars and stuff, it's just never,
Don't worry, me neither.
Yeah. But I do love virtual instruments and virtual synths. And my foundation, I think, is understanding ADSR and thinking through the process that way, and thinking about waveform, wave shapes. I really do.
Sure.
I'll sit here and I'll listen to like a Goldfrapp record and I'll be like, that's a bell. Okay. That's a saw. It's like just a game that I spend a lot of ear training time. I spend a lot of time listening to stuff. And especially when I watch TV and film, I'm like, I know that virtual synth. So
right.
A rule I have with myself is to never just use the preset as it is. I have to, if I'm using a preset, I must do lots to it so that it wouldn't necessarily be recognizable. And that might be a problem. Maybe it slows me down, but I want to make it something different. So I think that's made me better at a lot of the synthesis because, and maybe that's, how I was trained, when I went to school, because I think they had some rule, like if they could figure out if it was a preset, we would get marked down on the assignment. Like they're like, if you're using presets, you're not working, you're not doing anything. So I think as far back as that, I was just kind of trained to like, don't use presets, like, and
yeah.
And I never have. And
I remember like that party rock anthem song.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was like it was like one of the first presets in Logic Pro 9.
Right.
It was like that sound. And I was like, wait a minute, I figured this out.
Yeah.
They did this.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
so
they've been exposed.
Yeah. So I guess that would be like the pro tip that I would give people is to like spend time listening and seeing if you can pull apart like, okay, so this is, a square wave and it's, they're doing this with do you really understand attack, decay, sustain, release? And, then you can start layering effects and things. But I think also something else that I think a lot about is the order that I'm putting the effects on the track if I'm using a lot of effects. And I don't think people think about that either. I used to tell my students it was called STAN, spectrum, time, amplitude, and noise. So if you're aware of the order that you're using in your signal processing, it can actually really affect the sound. Because if I'm EQing
of course.
after
right,
I've compressed, I'm only EQing the compressor. Like maybe, okay, fine, if that's really what you want to do, but are you aware of what you're doing? So I do think about that a lot in my process.
Yeah, the chain of effects. It's like a pedal board on a guitar or something, right? It's like, it's the exact same thing. So
yeah,
I have my octave pedal before I have my envelope filter.
Right. Kind of and then you do sometimes I'll like spy over people's shoulder. I'm like, well, why are you EQing your compressor right now? Like, what do you? I mean, maybe if they really are aware and that's what they want to do, each to their own. But sometimes you're like, well, if you swap the order of that, and then they do, and they're like, whoa, and I'm like, well, there you go. So I think that's my only really big like. Just being aware, listen more and be more aware of what you're doing. Because it's real easy to just start throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks.
The noob process is, at least this was what it was like for me, was like, oh, that sounds like a cool synth. Let's try another synth and let's try to stack them together. And then all of a sudden you have this very tiny sound that doesn't really work with anything, right? Like sometimes you got to get the right sound on that one pass.
Yeah, I do spend hours like making synth sounds first, and then that makes me write something because I like the way it reacts to being played. And
the sound inspires creativity.
So that may be backwards from how some people work. They may write the melody first, but I'm never a melody first person. Like I'm just like a texture first person, and then that kind of goes that way. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say like pro tip for your synths because there's so many, but process, not processing, but think about your steps. Just to clarify.
Right. Yeah, totally. And do you have any like favorite like in the box synths that you would recommend, people should check out, like maybe a good place to start, or just whatever your favorite one is?
Well, I'm always going to tell people to check out the synths that Mock and Traction are making, because they're making some amazing stuff. So people should definitely check them out. I mean, there's so many great companies right now. It's like, we're lucky. Like I think there's never been a better time to be a composer because the palette is so huge. Like there's infinite number. Yeah. Like, it's crazy. I mean, and there's a lot of good plugin companies too that are not necessarily virtual synths, but I don't want to give too many away though too, because that's like my secret sauce.
whatever feels good for you.
Yeah. No.
I try to spill all the beans I can. That's but
how very saucy.
Each their own,
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. No, I really like biotech. I find myself using biotech a lot, and that's one of Traction's synths. It's very textural.
Okay, I'll have to look it up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Never
unique.
heard of it.
There's nothing like it.